Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Consumers Returns webinar sponsored by Optoro, the retailer's guide to the holiday return season. Thank you for joining us. Today, we'll be breaking down how retailers can leverage their returns experience to turn returners into returning customers, turn returns into profit, and ensure their end-to-end return strategy is a competitive differentiator for the holiday season. If you have any questions for our speaker today, feel free to submit them at any time during the presentation using the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Ken Lim, SVP of Client Development at Optoro. Ken, I'll pass things along to you.
Hey, good morning. Good morning to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Very happy to be here. Morgan, just as a heads up, in case I was trying to turn on my video, I don't seem to be able to, but I'm happy to keep moving on. So I'm the SVP of Client Development here at Optoro. What that means is I have responsibility over sales and sales engineering for the company. For those of us who are not familiar with Optoro, we are the leading provider of SaaS returns technology. Our software helps brands and retailers improve the overall customer returns experience on the front end via portal and drop-off services. We also help improve efficiency and revenue capture on the back end, physical handling, dispositioning, and sale of return goods. Across the past 10 years, we've been fortunate enough to call these leading brands like Best Buy, Staples, IKEA as partners and clients of ours. We've also worked with House and Plow and Hearth, who are more catalog and pure play digital retailers. Again, glad to be here. Thank you very much for everyone's participation. Let's jump right into it. So, there we are. Today, we'll be talking about what is probably on all of your minds right now, the upcoming holiday season. But what is often less discussed is what follows the holiday season and what we at Optoro live and breathe every day, which is lots and lots of return inventory and lots of return requests coming in from your end consumers. And really, our belief is that instead of accepting those returns as losses, I'm going to give you some strategies as well as some guiding tactics to leverage your returns experience and your returns processes to drive customer loyalty, recapture revenue, and frankly, even stand out amongst your competition. But first, let's start off with a poll. So here's the poll. How much did your return rates change during the holiday season last year? Not at all. It changed by under 5%, 5 to 10%, by more than 10 to 15%, all the way up to 20% or more. Again, how much did your return rates change during the last season? Not at all. It went down by 5%, 5 to 10%, 10 to 15%, 20% or more. Morgan, I'm assuming I'm going to stop and share the results. But they've not come through at all. Well, it looks like there were a lot of I don't knows out there. Let me see the share results. Not a whole lot of polling results out there. Well, in the interest of time, we'll move on. Morgan, maybe the poll may or may not be working for our audience, but in general, what we tend to see, and I'll get into this a little bit more later, is that during the holiday return season, not only are retailers and merchants seeing more returns in general because there's more stuff being purchased, but your return rates tend to increase by sometimes 30% or more, depending on what type of retailer you are, whether you have a heavier reliance on e-commerce or not. So, for those of you who saw increases in returns last holiday season, this may not come as a surprise. For the rest of you, let's take a few minutes to set the stage for what you might expect this year. So in 2020, not surprisingly, in the COVID environment, e-commerce grew by 44%, and it's not really slowing down. In fact, it's up another 18% this year on top of 2020's numbers. And this growing e-commerce sales and the e-commerce return rates, which sometimes reach 30%, maybe 40% due to consumers buying stuff sight unseen, effectively means that retailers and brands are about to face yet more returns. And how much exactly? According to the National Retail Federation, return merchandise amounted to $428 billion in 2020 in the US alone, and is likely increasing this year. And during the holiday season, these challenges will become even more acute. According to Optoro's research from earlier this year, 2 out of 3 consumers returned at least one holiday gift at some point during the next 30 to 60 days. This would have tied pretty nicely back to some of the to what you observed yourself in the poll, which means it's not surprising that returns amount to an estimated $115 billion across the board last holiday season. And this came in during a short window between November and January. Now, if you recall that the NRF estimate had $428 billion in returns last year, and that $115 billion came from the holiday season alone, that means that retailers and brands could be inundated with almost 30% of your entire year's volume within this span of 2 months from late December into January, February, maybe 3 months. And that's a huge challenge when you think about the pressure all of that physical influx is going to put on your warehouses and your distribution centers, whether it's your own warehouses, a distribution or third parties, which are already likely at capacity. So what we've seen retailers dealing with large backlogs because of this, and as a consequence, that slows their ability to process their forward orders, which are essential to the growth. And that's not to mention the potential churn you'll be facing if your customers try to return their orders and are faced with some type of an experience that is not easy or convenient. Before I get to kind of ideas and solutions and tactics, I'll add one more challenge into the mix. Once again, as we walk into this holiday season, we're facing supply chain and logistic disruptions. According to Salesforce, the overall cost that the retail supply chain is expected to increase by $223 billion in the back half of 2021. Now, this increase is driven in part by, for example, stores adding almost $50 billion because of shortages of employees. It includes logistics companies adding $160 billion because of shortages of shipping containers and capacity on those ships. So figuring out a way to move your returned items back into sellable supply and doing it quickly will be crucial this holiday season. Now that you're probably overwhelmed, or maybe a little overwhelmed, let's get into the good news. So we all recognize that the best return is likely no return at all. There are many ways out there to avoid returns in the first place, with things like Fit Finder technology, encouraging customer reviews so that your shopper knows what to expect, better PDP or product description pages and photos, or even arming your in-store associate if you're an omnichannel retailer with deeper product knowledge of your online assortments. Regardless, even with those best tactics in place, returns will happen and they will likely grow for most of us this coming year. With a smart return strategy in place, you can avoid massive backlogs. You can ensure that you don't deter your customers with a bad returns experience. And you can even use returns to help mitigate some of your product availability challenges. And doing all of this together in concert, you will stand out from your competition. First, we'll talk about how to ensure you are not deterring your customers from shopping with you again after a negative returns experience. Now, it's no surprise retailers are constantly and obsessively focused on ensuring that their customer experience is top-notch. But they can sometimes overlook the returns experience as part of the post-purchase journey. In this age of increased e-commerce shopping, the majority of a retailer or brand's customers will eventually become returners. In that same survey that we did early this year in May, what we found is that 7 out of 10 consumers reported making a return in the past 6 months. And if we think about that, the returns experience should be really just as important as the checkout experience. We also found in that survey that 90% or almost 90% of consumers actively reported churning after a poor consumer returns experience. So that begs the question, how do you ensure that offering a positive returns experience that keeps customers coming back? We think of a world-class return experience across 4 main dimensions. And the first thing is your policy. Your customers, we're all consumers. We often look at the returns policy before we even make a purchase. And 51% of consumers have reported being deterred from making that initial purchase based purely on looking at their policy page that's either too strict, too confusing to interpret, and so on, according to our research. Second is convenience. Customers today and your retail consumers are always looking for an easy, convenient way to return an item. They typically don't like what we around here call an arts and crafts project. We've all been there, we've all had to do it. Going online, printing a label, filling out a form, and with the packing and having to ship the item back. Third, refunds. So specifically, how long does it take to refund your customer after they have initiated the return or after they've dropped the return in the mail? And frankly, they're increasingly expecting refunds, quick refunds. And if you lag in getting that refund back to them, no surprise, they'll shop somewhere else the next time. And the fourth pillar around this in a world-class returns experience is exchanges. So many times your consumers like the item that they purchased, but they might just need a different size, a different color. And so we look at questions such as, are you making it easy for them to swap out the item for the one that fits better? Or even better yet, if you have a seamless process and system to facilitate uneven exchange, meaning sort of changing out the old item for an entirely different SKU. Now that we know how your customers are thinking about you when it comes to returns and how it impacts their perception, let's talk a little bit about what exactly they're expecting and how you deliver it consistently. According to our research from earlier this year, 78%, so almost 80% of consumers reported wanting an easy way to initiate that return online. So what we mean by that is, to the extent possible and consistent with the brand, don't make them call customer service lines to get an RMA. Try not to expect them to fill out a returns form by hand, and that returns initiation, online return initiation in this digital age is frankly what your consumers have started to expect. Let's pause here for 2 quick polls, if they will work. So Morgan, if you want to pull up the poll and let's activate them and see if folks can choose. The first poll is, this should be a multiple choice. So how do your customers initiate a return today? So do they have to call customer service or customer care? Can they use an online portal to request a return? Do they ship back a return with a prepaid return label and form? Other. Second question, and this one I'll elaborate a little bit more before you start polling. So when do you refund your customers relative to when they are asking for return authorization? So when do you refund your customers from the time when they're requesting return authorization? So for example, if you have an online portal, you do it immediately. Do you do it within 1 day, within 3 days, within 5 days, more than 7 days? Really, when do you refund them? relative to when you initiate the return. Let's see, the 9, 10, oh, there we go. This is fine. Got it. Let's end the poll. Share results. Okay, so on your screen, you should be seeing the results. So I'll start with the top question. All your customers initiate a return today, multiple choice. So it looks like a large proportion of us ask customers to call in, or you might be offering both an online portal alongside customer service. Without kind of going into the details of what you have exactly in play, this is relatively consistent with our industry polling. So what we've seen out in the marketplace today is that about 50% of folks have an online portal, whether that's a homegrown one, whether that's a third-party off-the-shelf online portal. So that's fairly consistent. It does surprise me a little bit how much folks are still relying on customer care, and sometimes that's the customer's choice as well, as to call and speak with a live human to process the return. So that's interesting. I think I would say the first question, fairly consistent. The prepaid return label, also pretty consistent. I would say that many retailers that we work with have really started to question what is the sort of legacy thinking of the convenience of a prepaid return label versus asking the customer to go onto that portal, answer a few quick questions before they generate that return label, as opposed to what we call a label in the box. The second question, which is when you refund your customers, really talks about the broader customer experience. It is not uncommon, especially for retailers who refund customers upon receipt into a distribution center or receipt into a warehouse, to see 7, sometimes upwards of 14 days from the time when the customer initiates the return online. I love seeing as well that there's actually a pretty 30%, almost 40% that are sort of in that less than 5 days, which shows that many of you are already starting down this journey of rethinking when you refund your customers, pulling that forward as much as possible and make sense financially from a financial riskiness standpoint. So up to carrier scan, maybe even a courtesy green refund for some of your trusted customers. So really interesting. Thanks for doing that. So let's stop sharing the polls and let's get back to the main show. So first theme, turning returns into repeat customers. My first tip is to invest in an online returns portal, so that 54% of you that are already there, good on you. For the rest of us, my recommendation is really think about how you invest in an online returns portal, configure it so that customers can initiate their return online, easily exchange or repurchase the item that they really want. What we've also found is that you can actually even further incentivize your shoppers to repurchase that item immediately by offering them what we call an instant credit or an instant voucher on that old item, on the return item. If there's one thing we know about consumers is that they want what they want when they want it. And any delay in getting a customer to repurchase that item is a delay that could mean that they might take their business and shop elsewhere. Furthermore, we've also seen that by offering that instant voucher up front, it can lead to up to 3 times more repurchases than a standard returns portal. So not only are they returning the old item, maybe exchanging it, but they tend to also shop for just additional SKUs, additional new items, as they're effectively getting advanced credit against that old item. On our side, we've seen this to be effective across a variety of merchants. So soft goods, home goods, other retail segments. And in general, with the right underlying technology and the right sort of logic to figure out when to offer up this instant exchange or instant voucher, you really don't have much financial risk from a fraudulent return standpoint. The second thing that consumers are looking for as part of the returns experience is ease. So what I mean by that is the ability to drop off their returns at a convenient location. In that early research from this year, we found that 81% of consumers want the ability to drop off a packageless item at a third-party location. So think about what Amazon has done with Whole Foods, Amazon has done with Kohl's. That's certainly a trend and certainly an expectation that will continue to surge. Let's pause and do another poll. So Morgan, if you want to pull up this third poll, I guess fourth. So what options do your customers have to return an item? What options do your customers currently have to return an item? There's multiple choice. So are they shipping the item back? Are they taking it to your retail store for one of the retail stores? Are they returning it in another retailer store or other? Twelve responses. 13 responses. I'm going to close the poll. Let's share the results. All right, so everyone allows customers to ship the item back. No surprise there. About 15% of you return to your physical store. Equal amount return to another retailer store. So that's interesting. So I'm not sure who all is in the audience today, but those aren't surprising. So I would say, as a peek into the future, I do, what we have been seeing is an increase in kind of that return to another retailer store motion. And then as what we'll also see furthermore in development is likely pickups. So return pickups, I think Walmart started that. We'll likely see additional services out there in the marketplace for pickups directly from wherever the customer is, home, office, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a second tip for a customer-friendly returns experience, adding a third-party returns drop-off location. Consumers prioritize choice and convenience now more than ever, and so allowing consumers to choose whether they'd like to ship the item back, return it to a store, drop it off at a third-party location, all of that optionality is what we've seen gives strong brands great competitive advantage, and it's increasingly becoming a preferred method. What's more, 62% of customers are more likely to shop online if they can turn it to a physical store. And this is especially meaningful for folks who are digitally native brands and don't have much or any of a physical store footprint. And from the Optoro perspective, we've really seen this adoption rate pick up, or increase, I should say, pun intended, especially within our segment of digitally native brands and even garment rental companies like Rent the Runway and others. So now let's turn our attention to the back end portion. We've been talking a lot about the front end user and customer experience when it comes to returns. Let's spend the next few minutes talking a bit more about what the post-holiday return surge means for your supply chain. Offering your customers flexible returns initiation will build loyalty. It's also just as important to ensure that your reverse supply chain, whether that's your owned or outsourced, isn't causing a backlog. I mean, something you definitely want to avoid during the holiday season. Instead, you should be focusing on turning those returns into profit where possible. Let's pull up the next poll. Do we have a next poll? Oh, sorry, not that one. Actually, I think we may have killed one poll in there. We'll come to that one in a little bit. So my first tip in all of this is to improve your returns processing tools and technology. If we remember that you might be processing up to 30% of your total annual returns during this short post-holiday period, as much as possible, you don't want to rely on manual processing or any kind of bolt-on applications to your warehouse management system, whether that's your WMS or your 3PL's WMS. Instead, if you're able to invest in more robust, user-friendly returns handling tools, what we found is that your distribution center and store associates will use less judgment, less tribal knowledge as they induct return merchandise, and instead they're going to be relying on system logic and machine intelligence to remove a lot of the subjectivity. And as they do that, it'll allow operators to move quickly through the return inventory, route it to the next best destination, whether that's back to stock, hopefully as much as possible back to stock, to a secondary resale channel, or to a donation channel that you might have set up previously. And what this will do is it'll allow you to speed up processing times, get the highest recovery on return items, avoid unnecessary touches, reduce stockouts, especially on seasonal or very shallow SKUs, and overall prevent a returns pileup that could be very costly and clog your otherwise sort of precious forward facilities. By reducing all of that manual decision making, one pretty big side impact, especially now, is that you're going to be able to hire and onboard people more quickly during the holiday period when your staff is in short supply. And you will also not have to rely or need to rely on the best and your brightest to process returns. We worked with a home goods retailer a few years ago, and it absolutely rang true for them in their e-com fulfillment center, where they effectively were able to use the same number of people during the holiday period year over year, even though they had seen a 30% in volume increase, and they were able to do that in part by just hardening and sharpening how they were physically processing in their return areas across the 4 fulfillment centers. And then this holiday season, a lot of retailers are also having to contend with an additional complication, and that is, no surprise, kind of that inventory shortage, whether it's a full-on shortage or just long lead times caused by supply chain disruption across the world, down to your manufacturers or your suppliers. So one easy way to replenish your inventory is to make sure that your returns aren't backlogged, so that all qualified restockable return items get back to a resellable position as quickly as possible. And by automating as much as possible, by improving on some of the returns handling tools and equipment, you can quickly improve that restocking speed and ensure that the inventory gets back into the hands of customers as and when they're ready to order them. My second tip for turning returns into profit is to leverage or expand any existing resale channels. In the work that I do, I see too many retailers using traditional liquidators that will frankly recover typically pennies on the dollar, especially sort of open box or as-is goods. And retailers should keep looking at ways to unlock the many secondary channels out there that lead to much higher recovery. End-to-end return technologies can help automate both the routing of the return inventory, auto-listing them onto a variety of sort of profitable secondary, either direct-to-consumer marketplaces, B2B resellers, or even to the brand's own outlet channel or outlet store. And what this does, it really allows a retailer to weave together a lot of the channels to capture the highest recovery on return inventory, and make sure that you're moving through those open box goods as quickly as possible. When done right, this can result in about a 20% increase in value capture or recovery, And I'll also point out that reselling goods on secondary marketplaces is not the only way to deal with returns that don't qualify back to stock. For those of you, and frankly, the many of you who are sensitive to your own, sensitive to your brand, start your own resale program. So there are certainly models out there like Patagonia's Wornwear as a great example of a sustainable way to allow customers to trade in used inventory, resell it to customers for secondhand goods, all while protecting your brand. And there are also other third-party partners that will help you create and sustain a brand-sensitive resale program. Now let's do this one last poll, I think last one, which is, I'm going to pull the poll. Are you relying on traditional liquidators or liquidation channels for your returns? Yes, no, I'm not sure. Well, respondents, it looks like. 15. Let's call it. Okay, so 13 of you said, responded. 70% said, nope, you're not. 30% said yes. Kind of a mixed bag in terms of how I think about this, right? I would say my hypothesis is that most of you are not relying on traditional liquidators for your returns out of brand concerns and channel conflict concerns. What I will say is that, assuming you haven't gone down the path already, it's worth inspecting that decision again. There are certainly many ways these days to both recoup value from non-restockable product while still protecting your brand. We won't go into it today, but happy to chat further if any of you want. But I meant to share the results. Here are the results I just talked about. Okay. So in summary, I hope I've given you some good insights into how you can prepare for the holiday return season and can even use some of that influx of returns to deliver a better customer experience and retain more profit for your competition, than your competition, I should say. But if I can leave you with 3 thoughts from today, I'll say this. 1, your customers are judging you on your returns experience, so make sure that you're offering convenient ways to initiate returns and drop them off. 2, 30% of your annual returns volume could be showing up within that 2 to 3 month short window post-holiday, and relying on legacy processing systems, manual decision making can be costly, and it can result in some bulges within your supply chain processing. And then last but not least, your returns are inventory waiting to be restocked. So fight inventory shortages with faster restocking times. I think I'll pause here. And I'm happy to take any questions. And we're just a little bit over the halfway mark. I'm not sure what the Q&A chat box looks like, and I will rely on our moderators to see if there are any questions that I should answer.
Hi, of course, Ken. So one of the first questions that we have is, what do you do with goods shipped back to you, and what do you do with goods that are shipped back to you that are not your products?
Let me make sure I heard the question correctly. What do you do with the items that are shipped back to you that are not items that you originally sold?
Correct.
Yeah, so what we typically see is that retailers the best would make sure that they have a way to hold and contact the customer and send it back. Now, being able to do that would imply that you've got at least a capability within your return center or return processing facility to quickly identify um, that those goods are not yours and have a way to quickly pivot and get an email or a call up to the originating customer. There are times where I've seen situations where there's just so little information that comes in kind of like a blind package that retailers will triage, hold, and then end up having to donate or destroy the product. Within our own sort of experience, what we've seen good retailers do is to make sure that within the returns processing technology, there's a quick way and seamless way to capture the information needed to do some of that troubleshooting. Um, in our returns warehouse management system, we have kind of an exceptions flow that allows all of that to happen. And then the customer care agents are able to view all of that information that's captured by the warehouse associate in order to pass that information along to the end customer. Say, hey, you know what? You never ordered this X item from us, so what do you want to do with it? Well, what do you want us to do with it? That's probably the best sort of customer experience. But of course, if it's just something that they send in is just a small item or it's a ball of yarn, then I don't think you want to kind of go through those motions.
Okay, great. Our next question is, do you have information on retailer returns to brick and mortar versus online sales?
Do we have information about retail returns to brick and mortar versus online sales? I'm trying to interpret what is that what it said there? Is that the question exactly?
Yes, correct.
Do you have information? I'm trying to interpret what the underlying question is. But so the short answer is yes. I'm not entirely sure specifically what within. I think maybe what they might be saying is what's the percentage of items that might be returned to a store versus online. If that is indeed the question, then for retailers that have an omni-channel presence and a large omni-channel presence, so meaning 1,000, 2,000 type stores, physical stores, what we've observed is that up to 80 to 90% of online orders can show back up in one of those physical stores. I think that's what the question is getting at, but I'm not 100% just based on what was written. So feel free to contact us afterwards, and I'm happy to clarify if I didn't answer that question correctly.
Great. Our next question is, what is the best way to set up a brand sensitive resale program?
Call us. No, I'm just kidding. Well, we do offer those services. The best way in our mind is well, one is to make sure that you drive alignment internally to begin with your salespeople, or depending on who you are as a brand. If you're selling other people's brands, then clearly you'll want to make sure that you consult with your merchant teams. Is to make sure that before you set it up, you want to align on the strategy so that you're aligned across the board with other internal stakeholders. Then the next step is really to either think about kind of building in-house or working with third-party service providers like us who have experience setting up brand-sensitive resale channels, whether that's B2B or direct-to-consumer. Somewhere along that way, depending on what type of product you sell, you may need to be thinking also about how to repair, refurb that merchandise to get it to a resellable condition. Now that need really varies depending on what product you sell, the inherent amount of value there is in your average merchandise and how repairable stuff is. But there are certainly a number of both apparel refurbishers out there that have supported these types of brand resale programs. Again, happy to talk offline. We do provide some of the white labeling reselling services, depending on which what type of product a brand or merchant might be selling. We have partnered with other refurbishers and repair partners in order to do the physical repair and value-added services to get it into a resellable condition for secondary market sales.
Great question. Our next question coming in is, what is the industry seeing relative to the percentage of returns actualized versus requested? And the second part to that question is, do you see most see returns by the customer within 1 to 2 weeks and then quickly fall off each other thereafter?
Oh, let me first say that these are some good questions. All right, so the first one, which is what percentage of items are actually physically returned after the return has been initiated? I don't have that statistic off the bat. I'm sure we can find it between us and our marketing teams. It's high. So it is, from what we've seen, is there's little drop off between the return portal initiation to the physical first scan and the physical drop off at one of the third party or store nodes. After 1 to 2 weeks, there undoubtedly there's going to be a fall off. What we think about and what we try to combat is that someone returns an item or initiates a return, that there are friction points of what they need to do to get the return inducted into the postal system, call it. And so they might not end up buying that second item again because, hey, I initiated a return, 1 to 2 weeks later, I just forgot about it, and it's just a clunky experience. And so when I realized that, I was like, well, maybe I should just go buy an item somewhere else. So our philosophy is always to try to use mechanisms and technology to reduce the time and the emotion of, hey, I want to return this item, to when I'm actually returning it. Because that motion, that feeling is what delights the customer, as opposed to putting more roadblocks in between the wanting to return it to returning it. And I know that can be controversial among some retailers and retail merchants, which is, hey, I want to add a few roadblocks in there so I don't get inundated with returns unnecessarily. But what we've found is that that sentiment is one that's good for the short term, not great for the long term. Second part of the question was what again, ma'am?
Yes, that second question is, do most see the returns by the customer within 1 to 2 weeks and then quickly fall off each week?
I think I covered off that one. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so the next question we have coming in is, what other returns trends do you expect to see coming out of this holiday return season?
What other trends? Is that right?
Yes.
I spoke a little bit about holiday pickups. That's kind of a longer term trend. We are absolutely starting to see within the industry more partnerships similar to like how Amazon worked with Cold. So in our instance, we activated sort of what we call express returns. So working with about 1,000 plus sort of different staple stores locally and nationwide, so that a variety of merchants can actually take a lot of participating merchants, customers can take unpackaged material into a staple store to initiate the return and induct it physically into the network. And then in-home pickups are starting to bubble up. I think that's kind of a couple of three trends that I was seeing and expecting both this holiday season and frankly beyond.
Okay, great. We have a couple more questions coming in. One of our final questions is, how do you charge a customer to return items not yours?
How do we charge? How do we charge customers who does what? Sorry, I missed the last word.
How do you charge a customer to return items not yours?
There are, well, I mean, in what we typically see when it comes to customer chargebacks is more so on the postage side, and what we do with our customers. So if our retail merchants need to build into that physical and financial workflow to charge a customer for whatever reason, whether it's the wrong item, not their item, shipping, anything like that, they'll be able to configure a lot of that into the actual returns portal. So there's a way to charge your customer for a variety of factors, right? You may charge them $4.95 to process the return if it's a certain type of item. You may charge them another amount if it's for an order that is below a certain value. So this would fall into one of those use cases, except of course you wouldn't know that until the item was physically processed and inspected into your facility. So in that instance, what I would recommend is to triage it almost like an exception flow that was in the first question, or one of the first questions early on, which is, what do I do with the item that wasn't, like, I never sold this item? Triage that, and then go through the customer care motions of working with the customer around that. Because understanding that you don't want to take the loss on processing and dealing with someone else's merchandise, you also have to think that your customer may frankly just have been very accidentally sending the item back. So you don't want to assume that you can just take a chargeback against their credit card without first having that discussion with them where possible and within reason.
Excellent. So we have one more question before we wrap up for today. That final question is, if they choose not to pay, do you donate to charity or do you have to destroy?
Not to sound like a consultant, but it depends. No, but in all seriousness, it does vary. So our philosophy and how we consult or work with our partners and with our clients is to encourage them to set up donation programs, and we do this a lot. Some of our customers do it independently from if they're doing the processing inside their four walls, or if they're doing it within one of the network four walls, then we already have preset donation programs for a variety of merchandise. Now, we do absolutely run into some of our retail partners where they, again, for brand sensitivity reasons, choose to destroy the items, and we've built the workflows inside our reverse warehouse management system to be able to support both a donation as well as a destroy motion. But again, we're as Optoro, we're here not only to provide returns technology to enhance the experience and the profitability for our retail merchants, but we also are here because we recognize what an outsized impact retail returns has on the environment. So where possible, we encourage donation. And we've got a kind of a little roster of donation partners out there. I'm happy to share that after the fact as well for anyone that's interested in sort of setting up a donation program. We obviously are just there to support it and to support the overall mission of what we do.
Okay, great. Looks like we had a great series of questions that came in today. So it looks like we will wrap from here. To our audience, thank you so much for everyone joining us today, and a huge thank you and round of applause to you, Ken, for hosting such an amazing session. And for our audience, if you submitted a question that we didn't get to, we will follow up with you by email shortly, and you can also look forward to receiving an on-demand link to this presentation directly to your email inbox as well. So keep a lookout for that. And also feel free to stick around for a few seconds to leave feedback and suggestions for us in a survey at the close of this webinar. And we'll use that feedback to guide us in producing upcoming webinar topics so we can keep giving you exactly what you want. So with that, I'll bring this program to an end. And on behalf of Optoro, Consumer Returns, and the WBR Insights team, we thank you for your time. Have a great day, everyone.